The phone rang Thursday night as I was making my usual herbal tea. The subtle sound of the old-fashioned machine I'd stubbornly refused to replace with a modern one cut through the silence of my living room. I set the kettle aside and, wiping my hands on my apron, made my way to the phone on the small table by the window. "Alice, can you hear me?" Beatrice's voice sounded strange, strained and quieter than usual, as if she were speaking with her hand over the receiver. "Bea, what's wrong?" I asked, instantly picking up a note of alarm. "They're here again," she whispered. "Third time this week. Trevor and that woman, Lorraine. They're up to something, Alice." I sighed, leaning against the wall. My son and his wife were bothering my older sister again. No wonder. After Trevor married Lorraine 5 years ago, our relationship had slowly but surely begun to deteriorate. And we used to be so close. The only son who had become my main support after my father's death. At least, that's what I thought. "What are they doing at your place?" I asked, trying to speak calmly. "Lorraine keeps talking about some paperwork, that I needed to think about the future, about how hard it is to keep such a big house by myself." Beatrice was silent for a moment, then added in a shaky voice, "Alice, Lorraine brought a man in yesterday. He was in a suit, carrying a briefcase. They were locked in the kitchen, whispering. When I came in, they were quiet. I had a bad feeling. My sister, in her 72 years, was still a remarkably sensible and independent woman. Since her husband's death 12 years ago, she'd lived alone in her spacious house in University Park, an upscale neighborhood where property values had only risen over the years. Unlike me, Beatrice and her late husband always knew how to handle money. "B, did you ask who this man was?" "Of course I did. Lorraine said it was a friend of hers who helps with investments. But when I insisted on an introduction, Trevor intervened, said I was tired and needed a rest. Can you believe it? In my own house." I squeezed the tube tighter. Trevor, my son, once a caring boy who brought me flowers from the neighbor's lot and cried when he accidentally broke my favorite vase. Now a 42-year-old man who looks at me with ill-concealed irritation when I come over for dinner once a month. "B, have you been taking any medication? Maybe Lorraine gave you something?" "What do you take me for?" The sister was indignant. "I'm in my right mind, and no, I haven't taken anything. But it seems to me," she lowered her voice to a whisper, "I think they're putting something in the food. Yesterday, after the tea Lorraine made, I felt strange. I felt dizzy. A chill ran down my spine. I looked out the window at the dark evening sky, lit by the lights of the neighboring houses. Middletown, where I lived, was a little over 3 hours from University Park. "I'll be there," I said firmly. "Tomorrow morning. Don't sign any papers, do you hear me? No matter what they say." "All right." Beatrice's voice trembled slightly. Just, just don't tell Trevor you're going. Please." After we said goodbye, I sat in the chair for a long time, staring at the cooling tea. My thoughts were jumbled. Perhaps Beatrice was exaggerating. She'd become more suspicious in recent years, especially after a small stroke last spring. But something told me that this time her fears were not unfounded. I pulled an old suitcase out of the closet and started packing. An hour later, I called my neighbor Patricia, asking her to watch the house and water the flowers. At 67, I didn't have many friends left in Middletown. After the death of Robert, my husband, my social circle had narrowed to a few neighbors and former colleagues from the school where I had taught geography for 30 years. Sleep that night was not easy. I tossed and turned, remembering how Trevor had changed since marriage. Lorraine Pettibone, now Bramble, had come into his life when he was 37. She worked at the same insurance agency, was 8 years younger, and as it turned out later, twice divorced. There was something about this woman that had alarmed me from the beginning. Her overly attentive gaze when Trevor talked about our family finances, her over-interest in my house and savings. Just concerned about our family's future, she said with a smile that didn't affect her eyes. My home was treated with poorly concealed disdain by Lorraine. "It's rather cozy," she said on her first visit, glancing around my modest living room. And when she heard about Beatrice's house in University Park, her eyes lit up with a special sparkle. In the morning, I loaded my suitcase into my old Ford and hit the road. The day was clear, sunny, but cool. Typical October in our part of the country. The road was familiar. How many times had I traveled to visit Beatrice over the years, especially after her stroke? We had always been close, despite the 5-year age difference. There had been a black cat between us when we were young, over a boyfriend, as sisters often do. But time had erased the resentment, leaving only warm affection and shared memories. Arriving at University Park around noon, I headed straight for Beatrice's house. The neighborhood looked as elegant as ever: manicured lawns, stately oaks, neat mansions built in the 30s and 40s. My sister's house, 2 stories high, with white columns and a wide veranda, stood out even from the neighbors. Hudson, Beatrice's husband, had been a successful investment advisor and had left her a sizable inheritance. As I parked, I was surprised to see an unfamiliar silver Lexus in the driveway. My heart clenched uneasily. When I got to the door, I rang the bell and prepared to see my sister. But Lorraine opened the door. "Alice," she exclaimed with feigned surprise. "What a surprise! We weren't expecting you." She stood in the doorway like a lady of the house, wearing an elegant beige dress and heeled shoes. Her brown hair was done up in a fashionable updo, and she had a smile on her face that never seemed genuine to me. "I came to see Beatrice," I said, trying to stay calm. "Is she home?" Lorraine paused, as if considering the answer. "Come in, of course," she said at last, stepping aside. "We need to talk." I walked into the spacious hallway, noting the small changes in the interior, the new cushions on the couch, the different vase on the table, the rearrangement of the photos, the little things you usually notice when you know a house well. "Where is Beatrice?" I repeated the question without taking off my coat. "Alice, dear." Lorraine pointed to the living room. "Let's sit down. Trevor will be back soon. He's out getting groceries." Her tone, patronizing and fake caring, made me tense up even more. I asked where my sister was. My voice became firmer. Lorraine sighed, her face taking on an expression of sad concern. "Beatrice is in a good place now, where she's being cared for by professionals. After the last episode, Trevor and I decided she needed constant care." "Episode? What episode?" I felt the blood rush to my face. "What are you talking about?" "She didn't tell you?" Lorraine shook her head with feigned sympathy. 3 days ago, Beatrice had a grand mal seizure. She forgot who she was, where she was, started accusing us of stealing her things. We called a doctor and he recommended a specialized facility. I shook my head incredulously. Beatrice had called me last night. She was perfectly fine, perfectly sane. Something like confusion flashed across Lorraine's face, but she quickly got over it. "That's part of the problem, Alice. She has lucid intervals when she seems normal. But then," she sighed theatrically, "then she loses touch with reality again. The doctor said it could be the early stages of dementia." "What doctor?" I stood in the middle of the living room, feeling anger building up inside. "Give me his name. I want to talk to him. And I want to know exactly what facility you put my sister in." Lorraine folded her arms across her chest, her posture more tense. "Dr. Neville Harper, and Beatrice is now at Quiet Gardens. It's a lovely nursing home for the elderly." "Quiet Gardens, I've heard of it. an expensive private facility on the outskirts of town. But something didn't add up. If Beatrice was really placed there 3 days ago, how could she have called me from home last night? I want to visit her. Now, I said, pulling out my phone. Give me the address. Sure. Lorraine smiled that smile that always seemed like a mask. But it's too late for visits today, and she needs time to adjust. Doctors don't recommend disturbing new patients in the first few days. At that moment, the front door opened and Trevor walked into the hall. My son looked tired and tense. His once slender figure had grown bulkier in recent years, and his dark hair had turned an early gray. When he saw me, he froze with the bags in his hands. Mom? The surprise in his voice seemed genuine. What are you doing here? I came to visit my sister, I answered coldly, who, as it turns out, you and Lorraine put in a nursing home without my knowledge. Trevor glanced at his wife, then slowly set the bags on the floor. It was an urgent decision, Mom. We didn't have time to consult with you. Aunt Beatrice needs constant care. She called me last night, Trevor. From here, from this house. There was that exchange of looks between them again. Something was definitely wrong. It's impossible, Mom. Trevor spoke slowly, as if to a child. Aunt Beatrice has been at Quiet Gardens since the day before yesterday. You must have been dreaming. I felt a cold rage come over me. What do they take me for? You don't have to make me crazy, Trevor. I remember our conversation perfectly well. Beatrice was disturbed by your frequent visits and by some man with a briefcase that Lorraine had brought. Trevor's face paled slightly, and Lorraine stepped forward. It was the financial advisor, she said. We were helping Beatrice with her investments. She asked for it. That's not true, I said firmly. Beatrice never trusted outsiders with her finances. After Hudson's death, she'd managed everything herself, and successfully. There was a tense silence in the room. Trevor walked into the living room and sank heavily into a chair. Mom, you don't understand, he began. For the last few months, Aunt Beatrice had been changing. She's become forgetful, suspicious. She'd call me in the middle of the night, claiming someone was in the house, accusing the neighbors of following her. How come I don't know anything about this? I asked, looking him straight in the eye. We didn't want to bother you, Lorraine interjected, sitting down next to him and putting her hand on his shoulder. You've been through enough since Robert's death. Besides, Beatrice asked me not to tell you. She always prided herself on her independence. It sounded almost plausible. My sister was indeed a proud, independent woman. But, why did she call me yesterday? And why did she sound reasonable? I want to see her, I repeated. Tomorrow morning. Of course, Lorraine nodded. Trevor will drive you. Now, maybe you'd like to get some rest. Your usual room is ready. I always stayed at Beatrice's when I came to University Park. The little guest bedroom on the second floor was almost mine. No, thank you, I replied coldly. I'll stay at a motel. Mom, don't be silly. Trevor frowned. Why waste money when there's plenty of room here? I shook my head. I prefer a motel, and I want to look around Beatrice's house, make sure everything's okay. We're only here for a few days, Lorraine said quickly. We're keeping an eye on the house while we figure out the future plans. What plans? I was immediately alarmed. Aunt Beatrice can't come back here to live alone, Trevor said, avoiding my gaze. This house is too big for her. It needs constant upkeep. We're thinking of selling it. Sell it? I couldn't believe my ears. Without Beatrice's consent? Without consulting me? We have a power of attorney, Lorraine said calmly. Beatrice had signed it last week. Trevor is now her legal guardian and has the authority to make decisions on her behalf. So that was it. Everything was falling into place now. The frequent visits, the mystery man with the briefcase, Beatrice's sudden dementia. Show me that power of attorney, I demanded. Trevor answered, still not looking me in the eye. But it's all legal, Mom. We're acting on Aunt Beatrice's behalf. I felt despair rising inside me, mixed with anger. Something was happening, something terrible, and I wasn't ready for it. I want to look around the house anyway, I said, heading for the stairs. Of course, Lorraine shrugged with feigned indifference. Make yourself at home. I went upstairs and entered Beatrice's bedroom. The room looked untouched, the same pictures on the nightstand, the same old plaid in the chair by the window. But something was wrong. I opened the closet. Half of her things were gone. Her favorite perfume and creams were gone from the bathroom. The books she always read before bed were missing from the bedside table. When I came back downstairs, I found Trevor and Lorraine in the kitchen. They were arguing quietly, but stopped talking when they saw me. Where are Beatrice's things? I asked bluntly. Her clothes, books, toiletries? We took the essentials to Quiet Gardens. Lorraine replied. There's not much room for personal items there. I nodded, pretending to accept that explanation. I'll go to the motel, I said. I'll be here at 9 tomorrow morning, and we'll go to Beatrice's. Don't be late. Trevor got up. Mom, I can take you. You don't have to, I interrupted him. I have my own car. I turned around at the door and looked at them. My only son and the woman who seemed to have changed him completely. What had happened to the sensitive boy I'd raised? When did his eyes become so cold? See you tomorrow, I said as I walked out into the cool fall evening. As I got into the car, I felt my hands shaking. Something was very, very wrong here, and I was determined to find out exactly what was going on with my sister. The Blue Pine Motel on the outskirts of University Park wasn't fancy, but it was clean and inexpensive. As I settled into the small room, it took me a long time to fall asleep. The leaves rustled outside the window, the sound of cars rumbling in the distance, and anxious thoughts swirled in my head. Beatrice couldn't be calling me from the nursing home, pretending to call me from her own house. So Trevor and Lorraine were lying. But why? And where was my sister really located? I woke up this morning determined to figure it out for myself. After a quick breakfast in the motel cafeteria, I opened the phone book I'd found in the nightstand. Quiet Gardens did exist. It was a respectable assisted living facility on the western edge of town. I dialed the number listed. Hello, Quiet Gardens. How can I help you? A pleasant female voice answered. Good morning. I tried to speak calmly. My name is Alice Bramble. I'd like to know about my sister, Beatrice Calhoun. She was supposed to have joined you a few days ago. There was a pause, the sound of typing keys. Yes, Mrs. Calhoun was admitted. What can I do for you? My heart sank. So Beatrice is really there. But how could she have called me? I'd like to visit her today. What time is that possible? Just a moment, I'll check. Pause again then. I'm sorry, but your sister's chart says that visits are only allowed to her legal guardian, Mr. Trevor Bramble, and persons approved by him. I felt the blood rush to my face. I'm her own sister. We've always been close. I understand, ma'am, but these are the rules. We have to follow the guardian's instructions. Can I at least talk to her on the phone? I'm afraid not. Dr. Harper left instructions to limit outside contact during the first week of adjustment. That Dr. Harper came up in conversation again. I wonder if he really existed. Can I speak to Dr. Harper? Dr. Harper is in on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Today is Monday, and he's not in. I thanked the woman and hung up. So Beatrice was indeed at Quiet Gardens, but that didn't explain how she could have called me from her house on Thursday night if, according to Trevor, she had been placed there as late as Wednesday. I decided to stop by Beatrice's house one more time before Trevor's visit. It was early 9 o'clock and I had an hour to spare. Maybe there I'd find some clues, some documents, something that would clear things up. Parking around the corner, I approached the house from the backyard. Beatrice always had a spare key hidden in a small garden gnome near the gazebo. I hoped Trevor and Lorraine didn't know about it. To my relief, the key was in place. I quietly entered through the back door, listening. The house was silent. Apparently, Trevor and Lorraine were still asleep or had already gone out. The first place I went was Beatrice's study, a small room off the living room where she kept all her important papers. The desk was neatly organized, not a single paper in sight. I began to carefully open the drawers. Most of them were empty, but in the bottom one, I found several folders of bank statements. Flipping through them, I found nothing unusual. The usual utility bills, groceries, medications. The bookcase didn't yield any information either. I moved to the bedroom, looking through all the dresser drawers, the bedside tables. Nothing. All of Beatrice's personal papers seemed to have disappeared along with half of her clothes. Time was running out, and I was about to leave when my eyes fell on the wastebasket in the corner of the study. Beatrice was usually tidy and regularly emptied the trash, but now the basket was almost full. I flipped its contents to the floor and began sorting through the crumpled papers. Most of them were drafts of letters or bills. But among them, I found a crumpled sheet with the logo of the law firm Crawford and Associates. It was a draft power of attorney, dated last Wednesday. It said it authorized Trevor Bramble to act on Beatrice Calhoun's behalf in matters of health care and estate administration. At the bottom was Beatrice's signature, jagged, shaky, not at all like her usual crisp handwriting. I folded the paper neatly and tucked it into my bag. It was the first clue, though it didn't explain how Beatrice could have called me after she'd supposedly been placed in Quiet Gardens. Quickly tidying up the office, I exited the same way I had entered and hurried to my car. It was almost 9 o'clock, and I didn't want to be late for my meeting with Trevor. When I returned to the house from the front door, I found that Lorraine's Lexus was no longer in the driveway. The call went unanswered. I waited 15 minutes, then another 15. Trevor didn't show up. Finally, I pulled out my phone and dialed his number. After the fifth ring, he answered. "Mom?" His voice sounded strained. "Trevor, where are you? We were supposed to meet at 9. "I'm sorry, Mom," he coughed. "There's been an emergency. Lorraine wasn't feeling well, so I took her to the doctor. What about our arrangement to visit Beatrice? Let's reschedule for tomorrow. Or, he hesitated. Why don't you go yourself? The address of the Quiet Gardens is easy to find." "But you know they won't let me in without your permission," I said, trying to hold back my irritation. "You were the one who talked about some kind of restriction on visits yesterday." Trevor was silent for a few seconds. "Okay," he said finally. "I'll call them and tell them you're coming. They'll let you through. It was too easy. Yesterday, he and Lorraine had been obstructing my visit in every way possible, and today, all of a sudden, they were so willing to cooperate." "Thank you," I said, not wanting to show my suspicions. "Call them right now, please. I'll be there in an hour." As I hung up the phone, I thought about it. Something wasn't right here. Trevor had never been a good liar. Even as a kid, I could always tell when he wasn't telling the truth. And now, his voice, his uncertainty, gave away that the story of Lorraine's illness was a fabrication. Before I went to the Quiet Gardens, I decided to test one more theory. What if Beatrice was still in town? Maybe in the hospital? I called University Park City Hospital, identified myself as Beatrice Calhoun's sister, and asked if she had been admitted in the last week. The answer was no. I did the same thing with St. Mary's Hospital on the other side of town. Same result. There was nothing left to do but drive to Quiet Gardens. I typed the address into the navigator and set off. The pension was located in a picturesque place, surrounded by a pine forest. The Victorian-style building looked well-maintained and solid, clearly not cheap. I parked in the visitors' parking lot and entered the spacious lobby. At the front desk sat a young woman with a friendly smile. "Good afternoon. How can I help you?" "My name is Alice Bramble. I'm here to visit my sister, Beatrice Calhoun. Her guardian, my son Trevor Bramble, should have called to warn me of my visit." The woman looked at the computer. "Yes, Mr. Bramble did call, but I need to confirm some details. Just a moment, please." She rose and disappeared behind a door at the back of the room. She returned a few minutes later, accompanied by a tall, middle-aged man in a white coat. "Mrs. Bramble?" He addressed me. "I'm Dr. Hawthorne, Deputy Chief Medical Officer. Pleased to meet you. Step into my office, please." I followed him down the hall to a small but cozy office. Dr. Hawthorne motioned for me to sit down, and he sat at his desk. "Mrs. Bramble, I understand you want to see your sister, but there are some, complications." "What kind of complications?" I was tense. "You see, Mrs. Calhoun's condition is unstable. She's disoriented, occasionally violent. Dr. Harper, who's monitoring her, has recommended limited visits at first." "I'd like to speak with Dr. Harper." "Unfortunately, he's not in today. He's only here part-time on Tuesdays and Thursdays." "Then I want to see Beatrice now," I said firmly. "My son gave me permission." Dr. Hawthorne folded his hands on the table. "Yes, Mr. Bramble called, but he also mentioned that your visit might upset the patient. He asked me to assess the situation and make a decision based on Mrs. Calhoun's condition at the moment." I could feel the anger building up inside of me. "Dr. Hawthorne, I drove 3 hours to see my sister. We're very close. If she really is in as serious a condition as you describe, my visit can only help." He looked at me thoughtfully, then nodded. "All right, but on one condition. A nurse will be present with you. And if we notice that your visit is having a negative effect on the patient, we'll have to cut it short." I agreed, even though it seemed strange. Why so complicated? Beatrice wasn't a raving lunatic requiring supervision, even if she did have dementia. Dr. Hawthorne summoned a nurse, a full middle-aged woman with an impenetrable face, and we went to the residential wing of the building. On the way, I noted that the boarding house looked decent: clean hallways, friendly staff, elderly people in rocking chairs and on benches in the courtyard. "Room 207, the doctor said, stopping at one of the doors. "Nurse Jenkins will be with you. The visit should not exceed 30 minutes. He left, and the nurse opened the door and gestured for me to enter. The room was small but bright, with a window overlooking the garden. Beatrice was sitting in a chair by the window, staring out into the distance. She looked gaunt, pale, and wore a gray robe I didn't recognize. "Bee?" I called softly, coming closer. She turned slowly, and her gaze focused on me. For a moment there was a flicker of recognition in her eyes, and then nothing. Nothing. "Hello," she said in an even voice. "Who are you?" I was numb. "My sister, the one we called every week, the one who remembered all the family's birthdays and could recount the plot of a movie she'd seen 30 years ago, didn't recognize me." "Bee, it's me, Alice, your sister." She tilted her head slightly. "I don't have a sister," she said in the same steady voice. "I'm the only child in the family." I looked stunned at the nurse, who stood at the door with a nonchalant look. "What's wrong with her?" I asked. "It's not like dementia, it's more like—" Dr. Harper diagnosed a combination of dementia and paranoid disorder, the nurse replied dryly. "The patient often denies the existence of close relatives." I turned to Beatrice again and took her hand. She didn't pull away, but she didn't respond to the shake. "Bee, you called me on Thursday. Do you remember? You talked about Trevor and Lorraine, about them coming to see you a lot. about the man with the briefcase. Beatrice looked at me expressionless. I didn't call anyone, she said. There's no phone here. Something was categorically wrong here. It was Beatrice, and it looked exactly like her. The same facial features, the same hands with the characteristic knotted fingers. But her demeanor, her look, her voice, everything was alien. Mrs. Calhoun needs rest, the nurse intervened. Maybe you should come another time. No, I shook my head. Just give me a few more minutes. I knelt down in front of Beatrice's chair, looking her straight in the eye. Bea, listen to me. It's me, Alice. Do you remember when we went to Crystal Lake when we were kids? How you taught me to swim? Remember our dog Marley, who was afraid of thunderstorms and hid under the bed? Beatrice's face didn't flinch a muscle. I don't know what you're talking about, she said. I've never had a dog. I can't swim. It was a lie. Beatrice was an excellent swimmer and had always loved dogs. She had a Labrador named Barney 5 years before she was married. I think that's enough. The nurse stepped closer. You can see that your visit is only confusing the patient. I rose reluctantly. Something was wrong here, very wrong, but I couldn't figure out what it was. I'll be back tomorrow, I said, speaking more to the nurse than to Beatrice. And I want to talk to Dr. Harper. He's in on Tuesdays and Thursdays, the nurse repeated. Tomorrow is Tuesday, but you'll need to make an appointment. I took one last look at the nurse. She was staring out the window again, as if oblivious to my presence. Leaving the room, I headed for the exit, but stopped halfway. In the hallway, I noticed a booth with pictures of the staff. Moving closer, I began to study the faces and names. Dr. Hawthorne was there, the same man I'd been talking to. Nurse Jenkins was there too. But Dr. Harper, the one everyone was talking about, wasn't on the stand. Back at the front desk, I approached the same young woman. Excuse me, I'd like to make an appointment with Dr. Harper for tomorrow. She smiled and opened the register. Doctor, Harper is available from 10 to 14. What time would be convenient for you? 10 o'clock if possible, I answered. Tell me, how long has Dr. Harper been with you? About 3 months, she said, writing down my name. He specializes in gerontological psychiatry. He's very experienced. Thank you, I nodded. Can I see a picture of him? I couldn't find it on the stand in the lobby. The girl was a little embarrassed. Dr. Harper has recently joined us, and his picture hasn't been added to the stand yet, but I'm sure you'll recognize him, a tall man with gray hair and a beard. I thanked her and walked out, feeling my anxiety growing. Something was categorically wrong with this situation. Beatrice looked like a lethargic, unlike herself. Dr. Harper, who everyone was referring to, was absent from the booth and apparently elusive. Most importantly, none of this explained how Beatrice could have called me from her house if she was already here by then. I sat in the car for a while, trying to collect my thoughts. Then I dialed Trevor's number. Mom? He answered after the third ring. Have you been to Quiet Gardens? Yes, I answered briefly. I saw Beatrice. She didn't recognize me, Trevor. She said she didn't have a sister, that she couldn't swim and had never kept a dog. There was a short pause. That's part of her illness, Mom. Dr. Harper warned that she might deny the existence of loved ones. Speaking of Dr. Harper, he wasn't on site and his picture isn't on the staff booth. He's a new specialist, Trevor answered quickly. He doesn't work every day. I made an appointment with him for tomorrow, I said, and I want you to be there. I can't tomorrow, Mom. I have an important appointment. Cancel it, I interrupted. It's about the health of your aunt, whom you claim to care about. I'll meet you at the Quiet Gardens at 10 o'clock in the morning. If you don't show up, I'll go to the police. I hung up without waiting for an answer. My heart was pounding. I wasn't used to such a harsh tone with my son, but now I felt it was the right thing to do. Back at the motel, I opened my laptop and began searching for information about Quiet Gardens. The establishment did have a good reputation. The reviews were mostly positive. I then moved on to finding information about Dr. Neville Harper. This proved to be more difficult. There was no one by that name associated with University Park or Quiet Gardens on social media or professional communities. While I was going through the search results, there was a knock on the room door. I cautiously approached and asked, "Who is it?" "Room service," a male voice answered. I hadn't ordered room service, but I opened the door ajar nonetheless, leaving the chain behind. Standing outside the door was an older man in a motel employee's uniform. "I didn't order anything," I said. "I'm sorry to bother you, ma'am," he replied. "But they left a note for you downstairs. They said it was urgent." He held out the envelope. I unhooked the chain, took the envelope, and thanked the man. He nodded and left. The envelope was plain, no writing. Inside, I found a piece of paper with a short message typed on the computer. "Beatrice is not at Quiet Gardens. Look elsewhere. Be careful." I reread the note several times, trying to figure out who could have sent it. Who else knew about my search? And most importantly, if Beatrice wasn't at Quiet Gardens, who had I seen today? And then, where is my real sister? With these anxious thoughts, I spent the rest of the day planning my next steps. One thing was certain. Tomorrow's visit to the mythical Dr. Harper might shed some light on this confusing story. Tuesday morning was overcast. Gray clouds covered the sky, and a light drizzle drizzled down. I woke up with a heavy head after a restless night full of disturbing dreams. The mysterious note kept me awake. Who could have known about my search? And what did it mean? Beatrice was not at Quiet Gardens. Then who had I seen yesterday? Pulling myself together quickly, I walked down to the motel cafeteria. At the front desk sat an older woman, not the same one I'd seen yesterday. I approached her. "Good morning. I got a note last night. Could you tell me who left it?" The woman looked at me puzzled. "A note? Last night? I've been here since 6, and no one left anything." "A man in a motel uniform brought it to my room, said it had been left downstairs." She shook her head. "We don't have room service, ma'am, and the only male on the staff is Pete, but he works the day shift." A chill ran down my spine. So the man who brought the note wasn't a motel employee. Who was he then? And why the masquerade? After a quick breakfast, I headed for Quiet Gardens. It was 9:45, and I hoped Trevor would keep his word and show up. But his car wasn't in the parking lot. I entered the building and went straight to the front desk. The same girl who had been there the day before was sitting at the front desk. "Good morning," I said. "Alice Bramble. I have an appointment with Dr. Harper at 10. The girl checked the register and nodded. "Yes, I see your appointment. Dr. Harper is already in place. Go down the hall, third door on the right." I followed her directions, feeling my tension rising with each step. When I reached the door marked Dr. N. Harper, I knocked. "Come in," a man's voice answered. I opened the door and entered a small office. Behind the desk sat a tall, gray-haired man with a neat beard and piercing blue eyes. He rose to meet me. "Mrs. Bramble, pleased to meet you. I'm Dr. Harper." We shook hands, and I sat down in the chair across from his desk. Strangely, the man seemed vaguely familiar, though I was sure I'd never met him before. "I wanted to talk to you about my sister, Beatrice Calhoun," I began bluntly. "Yes, of course." He opened the folder in front of him. "Mrs. Calhoun was admitted 5 days ago. She shows signs of dementia and paranoid disorder." "Dr. Harper, my sister called me Thursday night from her home. How is that possible if she was already here?" He frowned slightly. "That's impossible, Mrs. Bramble. Your sister has been with us since last Wednesday. She has no access to a telephone other than supervised calls in the presence of staff. So someone's lying." I looked him straight in the eye. Either you or my son and his wife. Dr. Harper held my gaze. I understand your concern, but the facts speak for themselves. Mrs. Calhoun came to us with a clear diagnosis and paperwork signed by her legal guardian. If you have any doubts about the legality of these actions, you should contact the appropriate authorities. At that moment, the door opened and Trevor entered the office. He looked tired and nervous. "Sorry I'm late," he said, nodding to Dr. Harper and me. "There was traffic." "That's all right, Mr. Bramble," the doctor replied. "We were just discussing your aunt's condition." I looked at my son carefully. "Trevor, I just told Dr. Harper that Beatrice called me Thursday night from her home. How do you explain that?" Trevor turned visibly pale, but quickly pulled himself together. "Mom, we've already talked about this. Aunt Beatrice couldn't have called you. You must be confused." "I'm not confusing anything, Trevor. I talked to her for over 10 minutes. She was telling me about your visits with Lorraine, about the man with the briefcase you brought in." Trevor cast a quick glance at Dr. Harper, who was watching our conversation with a neutral expression. "Doctor," my son turned to me, "would you mind leaving Mom and me alone for a few minutes?" Dr. Harper nodded and walked out of the office. As soon as the door closed behind him, Trevor turned to me. "Mom, stop it," he said quietly but firmly. "You're making this harder than it has to be." "What am I complicating, Trevor? Finding out the truth about what happened to my sister?" He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I knew from his childhood, a sign of extreme nervousness. "Aunt Beatrice is ill, Mother. She needs care. Lorraine and I are doing what's best for everyone." "What's best for whom?" I felt a wave of anger rising inside me. For Beatrice, trapped in this place against her will? Or for you and Lorraine, who got control of her house and her money? Trevor turned black. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly well," I interrupted him. "I found a draft of the power of attorney at Beatrice's house, with a signature that looked like she could barely hold a pen. What did you do to her, Trevor? Drugged her? Threatened her?" My son looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. His gaze was a mixture of surprise, anger, and fear. "Mom, I don't want to fight with you," he said finally, "but you'd better go back to Middletown and stay out of it." Stay out of it? I couldn't believe my ears. "This is my sister we're talking about." "Who never cared much for you?" Trevor said sharply. "When Dad was sick, where was Beatrice and her money? When you had to sell your car to pay for his treatment, what did your rich sister do?" His words hurt me because there was some truth in them. Beatrice really didn't offer financial help when Robert was battling cancer, but that didn't excuse what was happening now. "That doesn't give you the right to control her life and property," I said firmly. "I'm her legal guardian," Trevor replied stubbornly. "Everything is done by the law." "What law, Trevor? The law of the jungle, where the strong devour the weak?" We looked at each other like strangers. Where was that boy I raised? Who cried when he found a wounded bird in the garden? Who gave his pocket money to a homeless man on the street? The door opened and Lorraine entered the study. She was impeccably dressed, as always, in a strict navy blue suit, hair styled, makeup flawless. "I knew I'd find you here," she said, shifting her gaze from me to Trevor. "Honey, we have a meeting with the realtor in an hour. We should go." "Realtor?" I looked at her point blank. "You're already selling Beatrice's house?" Lorraine gave me a cold stare. "Alice, this is none of your business. Trevor is Beatrice's legal guardian, and he has every right to dispose of her property in her best interest." "Her best interests?" I grinned bitterly. "Or yours." "Mom, stop it," Trevor interrupted. "We're really planning to sell the house. It's too big, and it's expensive to maintain. The money will be used to provide for Aunt Beatrice here at Quiet Gardens." I don't believe a word you say, I said, rising. And I won't stop until I find out the truth. I'll talk to lawyers, to the police, to anyone. Lorraine stepped toward me, her eyes narrowed. Don't threaten us, Alice. You'll accomplish nothing but trouble for yourself. You have no proof of any wrongdoing. But we do have official documents and doctor's reports on Beatrice's condition. Doctor's reports? I shook my head. This mysterious Dr. Harper, who no one had seen before you got here. Dr. Harper is a respected specialist, Lorraine cut in, and he knows what he's doing. We stood across from each other like duelists. I could feel my heart pounding, my hands trembling with restrained anger. I want to see Beatrice again, I said, right now. That's impossible. Lorraine shook her head. She's in the middle of a procedure. Besides, your visit yesterday only upset her. Dr. Harper said she was very agitated after you left. Not surprising, I parried, especially since it might not be Beatrice at all. Trevor and Lorraine exchanged quick glances. What are you talking about? Trevor asked slowly. I decided to take a chance and show my cards. I have reason to believe that the woman I saw yesterday is not my sister, and I have a witness who will confirm that Beatrice could not have been at Quiet Gardens on Thursday night. It was a bluff. I had no witnesses, but Lorraine's reaction was worth the risk. Her face contorted with fear for a moment before she put back on her mask of cold calm. This is absurd, she said. You're not young, Alice, and you're probably starting to lose touch with reality yourself. Maybe you should get a checkup, too. Don't try to turn everything upside down, I said. I'm thinking straight, and I won't stop until I find Beatrice. Lorraine stepped closer, her voice low and threatening. That's enough, Alice. Your sister is already in a nursing home, and her house is already mine. Get out. Her words hung in the air like a slap in the face. I looked at Trevor, expecting some kind of reaction to this blatant rudeness to his mother. But he stood there, eyes downcast, silent as a statue. Trevor, I called softly, is that what I taught you? To stand aside when your mother is spoken to like that? He looked up, and I saw a mixture of shame and stubbornness in his eyes. Lorraine's right, Mom. You should leave. We've done everything by the book. Aunt Beatrice is getting the best care, and her house. Her house is just too big for a lonely old woman. I looked at him and my heart broke. My son, my flesh and blood, chose to side with a woman who manipulated him for money. Okay, I finally said. I'll leave, but don't think that's the end of it. I turned toward the door, but Lorraine grabbed my arm. Listen to me carefully, she hissed. If you go to the police or try to hire a lawyer, you'll only hurt yourself. We have connections, Alice, and money. What do you have? I released my hand from her grip. I have the truth, Lorraine, and sooner or later it's going to come out. With those words, I walked out of the office, closing the door behind me. There was no one in the hallway, not even Dr. Harper. I walked past the front desk without stopping and went outside. The rain had intensified, and I was soaking wet by the time I reached my car. Getting behind the wheel, I didn't start the engine right away. My hands were shaking, and I felt a lump in my throat. I felt helpless, crushed. Trevor had betrayed me. My sister was gone, and I didn't know what to do next. I went back to the Blue Pine Motel, feeling devastated. I spent the entire day in my room trying to collect my thoughts. I called several law firms, but they all told me the same thing. Without concrete evidence of wrongdoing, it's hard to do anything, especially with a formal power of attorney. Toward evening, I felt hungry and went down to the motel cafeteria. It was nearly empty, just a couple of truckers at the counter and an elderly man in the corner reading a newspaper. I ordered a coffee and a sandwich and sat down at a table by the window, watching the rain beat down on the glass. "Excuse me," came a voice next to me. "May I sit down?" I looked up. The same elderly man I'd noticed in the corner was standing next to me. He was in his 70s, with a neatly trimmed gray beard and shrewd brown eyes behind old-fashioned glasses. "Please," I nodded, though I didn't really want to talk. He sat down across from me, setting his cup of coffee on the table. "My name is Will Coventry," he introduced himself, "and I heard your conversation on the phone. Are you looking for a lawyer for a custody case?" I was alarmed. A stranger eavesdropping on other people's conversations didn't inspire confidence. "I'm sorry, but this is a private matter," I said coldly. He nodded understandingly. "Of course, I apologize for the indelicacy. It's just, I was a notary for 40 years before I retired, and over the years, I've seen too many cases of elderly people being cheated out of their property. That got my attention." "You were a notary public here in University Park?" "Yes, until last year." He took a sip of coffee. "Then I surrendered my license. Age, you know. But I'm still connected in the legal community." I hesitated. On the one hand, this man was a complete stranger to me. On the other, I was desperate for any help I could get right now. "My sister," I finally said. "She was placed in a nursing home against her will. My son and his wife somehow got power of attorney and are now trying to sell her house." Will Coventry frowned. "That's a serious accusation. Do you have any proof?" "Only that I spoke to my sister on the phone after she had supposedly already been placed in a boarding house, and that the woman I saw there behaved very strangely, didn't recognize me, said things that contradicted the facts of my sister's life." He rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "I wonder, was the power of attorney properly executed? Who authorized it? I haven't seen the original, only a draft. But my sister's signature looked like she could barely hold a pen." "What boarding house is she in?" "Quiet Gardens," I answered. "Do you know it?" Will Coventry nodded. "Of course, it's a respectable establishment, but there have been rumors lately." He stopped, as if hesitating whether to continue. "What rumors?" I stepped forward. "There was a change in management a few months ago. The new director, a Dr. Oliver Crosby, made some changes. Since then, several families have complained of strange behavior after their relatives were admitted." "Strange behavior?" I interjected. "Abrupt personality changes, memory loss, uncharacteristic behavior." He lowered his voice. "There was even one family who claimed that the woman they were shown during visits was not their mother, but they couldn't prove anything. She looked very similar, and the medical records said it was the same woman." I felt a chill run down my spine. What happened to that family? As far as I knew, they moved out of town after their mother's house was sold. The official story was that the elderly woman had dementia, and her son, as caregiver, had made the decision to sell the property to pay for her treatment. It sounded eerily similar to Beatrice's situation. "Mr. Coventry," I looked him straight in the eye, "do you think there is something illegal going on at Quiet Gardens?" He looked around cautiously before answering. "I can't assert that without proof, but I do know that there have been several cases in the last year where wealthy elderly people have suddenly found themselves in Quiet Gardens and their property was soon sold. And no one went to the police?" "They did, of course, but without concrete evidence, there's not much the police can do. Besides, Dr. Crosby seems to have connections in the local government. I've been wondering, is it possible that Quiet Gardens is involved in some sort of criminal scheme to take property from the elderly? And if so, where is the real Beatrice now?" "Mr. Coventry, could you help me?" I asked. "I have little time and no connections in this town at all." He smiled and his eyes warmed behind the glasses. "I'd be glad to help, Mrs. Bramble, Alice Bramble." "Mrs. Bramble, I'm no longer practicing as a notary, but I still have some acquaintances and some experience in such matters. If you'll allow me, I can help you with this situation." I extended my hand to him, and he shook it with his warm, dry palm. "Thank you, Mr. Coventry. Any help you can give me would be greatly appreciated. Call me Will, please, and the first thing we need to do is find out if your sister's power of attorney is legitimate. To do that, we'll need a copy of the document." "But how do we get that? Trevor and Lorraine are unlikely to give us one." Will tapped his fingers on the table thoughtfully. "Any power of attorney has to be registered. We can request a copy from the county courthouse. It'll take some time, but it's the legal way." I shook my head. "We might not have that time. Lorraine said they're already planning to sell Beatrice's house. Then we need to move faster." Will nodded. "I have a friend at the deed office. He might be able to help us get a copy faster." For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps with the help of this experienced man, I could uncover the truth and find Beatrice. "Thank you, Will," I said sincerely. "You don't know how much it means to me." He tilted his head slightly. "Don't thank me too soon. We don't know what we're up against yet. But one thing I can say for sure is that if your suspicions are correct and there is something illegal going on at Quiet Gardens, we need to be very careful. People capable of such machinations will stop at nothing to protect their interests." His words sobered me. I remembered the strange note, the mysterious motel employee, the elusive Dr. Harper. What had I gotten myself into? And more importantly, could Will and I find Beatrice before it was too late? The next week flew by like a blur. Will and I worked almost without rest, trying to gather information about Quiet Gardens and find Beatrice. Every morning we met in the motel cafeteria, discussed our plan of action for the day, and in the evening we exchanged our findings. Will proved to be an invaluable ally. Despite his age, he was 72. He had a sharp mind, extensive connections in the city, and surprising energy. Thanks to an acquaintance of his at the filing office, we had obtained a copy of the power of attorney issued to Beatrice in Trevor's name. The document looked legally impeccable, correct wording, all the necessary signatures, including that of a notary, one Richard Pratt. "Do you know this Pratt?" I asked Will as we studied the document in my room. Will shook his head. "I've never heard of him, and I know almost every notary in the area. Let's check his license." It turned out that Richard Pratt had received his notary license just 3 months ago. That coincided with what Will had told him about the change in management at Quiet Gardens. "That's suspicious," Will observed. "A new notary, a new director of the boarding house. There are too many coincidences." We also discovered that in the last 2 months, 3 properties belonging to the elderly people now staying at Quiet Gardens had been put up for sale, and all of the powers of attorney were certified by the same Richard Pratt. In parallel with this investigation, we were trying to find Beatrice. I was certain that the woman I'd seen at the Quiet Gardens was not my sister, despite the resemblance. We checked every hospital, private clinic, and nursing home within a 50-mile radius, but to no avail. On the 4th day of our search, there was an unexpected breakthrough. Will met up with an old friend of his, a former police officer, and the latter told him about a strange incident that had happened about 2 weeks ago. A patrol car had stopped a car for speeding on a road leading from University Park to a neighboring county. Behind the wheel was a young man who was visibly nervous. There was an elderly woman in the back seat who tried to say something to the police officer, but the young man claimed that it was his grandmother who was suffering from dementia, and he was taking her to a specialized clinic. The police officer issued a speeding ticket and let them go. "The description of the elderly woman matches Beatrice," Will said. "And the direction? There's only one place in that county where an elderly person could be placed: the Pine Forest Private Psychiatric Clinic. The next day, we went there. The clinic was located in a picturesque place, away from the city, surrounded by forest. The security at the entrance was serious. A barrier, surveillance cameras, a guard checking documents. How do we get there? I asked when we parked on the side of the road, not far from the gate. I have an idea, Will answered, but we're going to need help. He pulled out his cell phone and made a few calls. That evening we met with his friend, Dr. Allen, a former psychiatrist who still had a valid license. If your sister is really there, Dr. Allen said, I can try to gain access as a counseling professional, but I'd need an official reason. Say you were invited for a second opinion on her diagnosis, Will suggested. And who invited me? Dr. Allen raised an eyebrow. Her guardian, Will replied. We have a copy of the power of attorney that lists Trevor Bramble as Beatrice Calhoun's legal guardian. If the guards or the administration want to check, they'll be able to confirm it. It was a risky plan, but we had no other options. The next morning, Dr. Allen left for the Pine Tree Clinic, and Will and I waited in a nearby car, nervously checking our phones every few minutes. 2 hours later, Dr. Allen called. She's here, he said, room 212, but she's heavily sedated, barely conscious. I haven't been able to talk to her, but I've looked at her chart. There's no real indication for hospitalization. She's being held here under the pretext of suicidal observation, but there's no objective evidence of that in the records. Is there any way to get her out of there? I asked, feeling my heart pounding with excitement. The only legal way is through the courts, Dr. Allen replied. But to do that, you need solid evidence of wrongdoing on the part of the guardian, which we don't have yet, Will said grimly. After that discovery, we focused on finding evidence against Trevor and Lorraine. Will contacted a lawyer who specialized in protecting the rights of the elderly, and he agreed to meet with us. The main problem in these cases is to prove that the power of attorney was obtained fraudulently, explained the lawyer Simon Edwards, a tall, thin man with a keen eye. We need concrete evidence of pressure, manipulation, or that Beatrice was incapacitated at the time of signing. What about the fact that the woman at Quiet Gardens isn't the real Beatrice? I asked. Simon raised his eyebrows. If that's true, it's a felony, but it's extremely difficult to prove without genetic testing or other conclusive evidence. We were at an impasse. We had information about Beatrice's whereabouts, but no legal means of releasing her. We had suspicions of power of attorney fraud, but no concrete evidence. On the 6th day of our investigation, I took the desperate step of calling Trevor. We hadn't spoken since that day at Quiet Gardens, and I didn't know how he'd react. Mom? I could hear the surprise in his voice when he answered the phone. Trevor, we need to talk, I said bluntly. I know Beatrice isn't at Quiet Gardens. She's at Pine Barrens, and she's being drugged for no medical reason. There was a long pause. I don't know what you're talking about, he finally said, but I could hear the note of fear in his voice. Trevor, listen to me. I know what you and Lorraine did. I know about the fake patient at Quiet Gardens. I know about the notary, Richard Pratt, who got his license 3 months ago and has since certified the powers of attorney of 3 elderly people whose houses are now up for sale. I know enough to go to the police. Mom, you don't understand. His voice is shaking. No, you don't understand. This is about my sister's freedom and life. Your aunt who's always been good to you. Are you really willing to commit a crime for money? It's Lorraine, Trevor suddenly blurted out. She made the whole thing up. She met this Dr. Crosby, and they worked out a plan. I didn't mean to, Mom, I swear, but she said she'd leave me if I didn't help. I felt nausea coming up my throat. My son, whom I'd raised with love and care, had betrayed his family out of fear of losing the woman who'd manipulated him. Trevor, it's not too late to fix this, I said. Help me free Beatrice, and we'll find a way to mitigate the consequences for you. I can't. I could hear the desperation in his voice. You don't know these people. They're dangerous. If I go up against them, they'll. Did they what, Trevor? Did they threaten you? Not directly, but Dr. Crosby hinted that he knows people who can solve problems with radical methods. I sighed. This was worse than I thought. Trevor, listen. We can go to the police together. You'll tell them everything you know, and you'll get witness protection. Lorraine will never forgive me. His voice sounded lost. Would you forgive yourself if anything happened to Beatrice? There was a long pause. I need to think, he said at last. I'll call you back. But he didn't call back. Not that day, not the next. I tried to contact him again, but his phone was disconnected. On the seventh day after my confrontation with Lorraine and Trevor at the Quiet Gardens, as Will, Attorney Simon, and I were discussing how to proceed in the motel cafeteria, something unexpected happened. A group of people entered the cafeteria. 2 uniformed police officers, a man in a strict suit, and Lorraine. She looked confused and frightened, not at all like the confident woman I'd seen a week ago. They headed straight for our table. Alice Bramble? The man in the suit approached me, showing me his ID. Detective Michael Reed, University Park Police. We need to talk to you about your sister, Beatrice Calhoun. I looked at Will and Simon confusedly, then back at the detective. What's wrong? We've received information about possible wrongdoing against Mrs. Calhoun, the detective replied. Mrs. Lorraine Bramble agreed to cooperate with the investigation. Lorraine avoided my gaze, fidgeting nervously with the strap of her purse. Shall we sit down? Simon suggested, pointing to the empty chairs at our table. The detective nodded, and they sat down. Lorraine was across from me, but she kept looking away. Mrs. Bramble, Detective Reed began, we received an anonymous call last night indicating possible wrongdoing at the Pine Forest Private Psychiatric Clinic. The caller claimed that an elderly woman, Beatrice Calhoun, was being illegally held there. We did a preliminary check and found out that there is indeed a patient with that name in the clinic, placed there by the decision of the guardian, Trevor Bramble. I was the one who called, Lorraine said suddenly, her voice shaking. I couldn't keep quiet any longer. I looked at her in surprise. You? She nodded, still not looking me in the eye. The papers from Hudson Calhoun's law office came yesterday, she said. Turns out Beatrice had long ago put all her assets into an inviolable trust. The house, the investments, everything. No one, even with power of attorney, can dispose of those assets without her express consent, confirmed by an independent expert. Hudson took care of his wife even after her death, Will said quietly. But that's not all, Lorraine continued. In the package of documents was a flash drive with audio recordings. Beatrice was secretly recording our conversations with Trevor, all the conversations where we discussed the plan. And where are those recordings now? Detective Reed asked. I have them with me. Lorraine pulled a flash drive out of her purse and handed it to the detective. Everything is there. How we planned to get power of attorney. How we arranged with Dr. Crosby to put her in the clinic. How we discussed selling the house. Where's Trevor? I asked, feeling a strange mixture of anger, frustration, and relief. Lorraine looked me in the eye for the first time. He ran away. When the papers came in and he heard the tapes, he broke down, said he couldn't live with it, packed up and left. I don't know where he is now. Detective Reed made a note in his notebook. We'll put out an APB on him as an accessory to murder. Now, Mrs. Bramble, he turned to me. We're heading to Pine Forest with a warrant for your sister's release. Would you like to come with us? Sure, I stood up, feeling my heart pounding with excitement. I'll go too, Simon said, as Mrs. Calhoun's legal representative. The detective nodded. I'll stay here, Will said, shaking my hand. I'll wait for news. Before we left the cafeteria, Lorraine stopped me. Alice, she hesitated. I know this won't fix anything, but I'm sorry. I didn't think it would go this far. I just wanted a secure life for Trevor and me. I looked at this woman who had caused so much pain to my family, and I felt nothing but tired. You're right, Lorraine. This isn't going to fix anything. The drive to the Pine Barrens took about an hour. All that time I thought about Beatrice, about what she'd been through during those days, about her courage and foresight, recording conversations, setting up the trust, preparing documents in case of an emergency. When we pulled up to the gates of the clinic, Detective Reed showed the warrant, and the guards reluctantly let us through. A middle-aged man in a white coat met us at the entrance to the main building. Dr. Crosby? The detective asked. Yes. The man looked tense. What can I do for you? We have a warrant for the release of patient Beatrice Calhoun. The detective held out a document. And a warrant to search the clinic's administration offices. Dr. Crosby turned pale, but quickly pulled himself together. Of course we're cooperating with the police, but I must warn you that the patient is in an unstable condition and that moving her could be hazardous to her health. We have an independent expert's report refuting the need to hospitalize her, Simon intervened, pulling out a folder of documents. We also have evidence that she was placed here against her will, under an invalid power of attorney. Dr. Crosby pressed his lips into a thin line, but said nothing. One of the policemen stayed with him, and Detective Reed, the second officer, Simon and I went to the designated ward. Ward 212 was at the end of a long corridor. The policeman opened the door and we entered. Beatrice was lying on the bed, hooked up to an IV. She was pale, shriveled, but she was definitely my sister. When the door opened, she slowly turned her head and focused her gaze on us. Alice? Her voice was weak, but there was a spark of recognition in her eyes. You came. I rushed over to her, gently hugging her skinny shoulders. Of course you came. I've been looking for you everywhere. I knew you'd find me, she whispered. As soon as they find out about the trust and the records, they'll know they've lost. You thought of everything. I squeezed her hand. Good girl. Not quite, she smiled weakly. I didn't plan for them to replace me at the Quiet Gardens. Who was that? The actress? We don't know yet, Detective Reed replied, stepping closer. But we'll find out. Mrs. Calhoun, can you tell me what happened? Beatrice nodded weakly. Trevor and Lorraine started coming to see me often after my little stroke in the spring. At first, I thought they were just caring, but then I noticed Lorraine's interest in my finances, in the house. I began to suspect something amiss and started recording our conversations. She paused, gathering her strength. One day they brought in a man they introduced as a financial advisor, but the documents he brought were a power of attorney. I refused to sign. Then a few days later they came again, and Lorraine offered me tea. After it, I felt strange. I remember signing some papers, and then I woke up here. They put something in your tea. The detective nodded. We'll run tests to find out what it is. And then I heard from the nurse that some woman was posing as me at the Quiet Gardens. Beatrice continued. Apparently they'd found someone who looked like me and put her there for diversion, in case anyone came looking for me. How did the law firm know to send the documents now? Simon asked. I had an agreement with my lawyer, Beatrice replied. If I didn't contact him for more than 2 weeks, he was to activate the protection protocol, send the trust documents, records, and notice to the authorities. I looked at my sister with admiration. Even in her weakened state, she retained clarity of mind and fortitude. We need to get you to the hospital for an examination, Detective Reed said. and then we'll take a formal statement. Beatrice nodded. I'm ready to tell everything I know, and I want these people, Crosby, Trevor, Lorraine, to be punished for what they did, not just to me, but to other elderly people. As the paramedics prepared Beatrice for transport, Detective Reed took me aside. Mrs. Bramble, this is a serious case. Preliminary information suggests we're dealing with an organized crime scheme to take property from the elderly. Dr. Crosby, that notary Pratt, the Quiet Gardens Administration, they could all be involved. And your son? I understand, I nodded. Trevor has to answer for his actions, as much as it pains me to admit it. His testimony could help the investigation, the detective said cautiously. If you know where he might be. I shook my head. I have no idea, but if he contacts me, I'll let you know. When Beatrice was finally carried out on a stretcher and into the ambulance, I sat down beside her and took her hand. It's going to be okay, I said. You're safe now. She smiled weakly. I know, you found me, Alice. You always do. On the way to the hospital, I thought about the legal battle ahead. Beatrice and I were going to have to testify, attend court hearings, possibly face Trevor in the courtroom. It wasn't going to be easy, but with the help of Will, Simon, and now the police, we had a chance to not only get Beatrice her life and property back, but to stop these people from scamming anyone else. I squeezed my sister's hand, looking out at the scenery passing by outside the window. There was a long road ahead, but the first, most important step had been taken. Beatrice was free, and justice was beginning to be served. The following weeks flew by in a whirlwind of events. Beatrice spent 5 days at St. Mary's Hospital, where doctors gradually weaned her off the sedatives she had been drugged with at Pine Barrens. I practically stayed at her bedside, watching her strength and clarity of thought return day by day. You know, Beatrice said to me on the third day as we sat at the window in her room, looking out over the hospital garden, I was conscious the whole time, even when they thought I didn't know what was going on. It must have been awful. I squeezed her hand. The worst part was the helplessness. She smiled weakly, and the thought that I could die out there and no one would even know the truth. How did you know to prepare in advance? Those records, the trust? Beatrice looked thoughtfully out the window. After the stroke, I noticed how Trevor and Lorraine's attitude changed. They became overprotective, too interested in my affairs. And then I overheard Lorraine talking on the phone to someone about a promising property in University Park. So I decided to back up. I shook my head, admiring my sister's foresight. You were always smarter than me. Not smarter, she countered, just more suspicious. Years of working with Hudson in the investment business had taught me to always have a backup plan. While Beatrice was recovering, the investigation was gaining momentum. Dr. Oliver Crosby, director of Pine Barrens, was arrested on charges of unlawful imprisonment, fraud, and practicing medicine in excess of his authority. Richard Pratt, a false notary public who was found to have a fake license, was also arrested along with him. The woman who portrayed Beatrice in Quiet Gardens was also found. She turned out to be an actress from a local theater, Evelyn Birch, who claimed she was hired for a social experiment, supposedly to test staff reactions to a dementia patient. She was paid $5,000 for the role and given detailed information about Beatrice, including photographs and basic biographical facts. Lorraine, who decided to cooperate with the investigation in exchange for a reduced sentence, gave away all the details of the scheme. It turned out she met Dr. Crosby at a charity event 8 months ago, and he offered her an opportunity to invest in her future. The scheme was simple. Find elderly people with valuable real estate who have few relatives or weak family ties. Manipulate or trick them into getting custody. Place them in a supervised facility and then sell their assets and split the profits. This is the fifth case we've solved, Detective Reed said when he came to take Beatrice's statement at the hospital. And I'm afraid it won't be the last. Crosby and his team have been active for almost 2 years. What about the people who have already been hurt? I asked. Other elderly people whose homes were sold? We're trying to find all the victims and bring justice as much as we can, the detective replied. But in some cases, it's too late. Two elderly people died in Pine Forest under suspicious circumstances. We are conducting exhumations and toxicology tests. This news has shocked us. Beatrice could have been the next victim if not for her foresight and my persistence. Trevor was found a week after Crosby's arrest. He was renting a motel room in a neighboring state under an assumed name. When the police came for him, he didn't resist and even seemed relieved. I received a call from the police station informing me that Trevor was requesting a meeting with me before giving a formal statement. You don't have to meet with him, Detective Reed said. It's your right to refuse. I thought about it for a long time. Part of me wanted to never see my son again, never hear his excuses. The other part, the motherly, stubborn part, needed an explanation, an understanding of how my boy could do such a thing. I'll go see him, I finally decided. Beatrice, who had already returned to her house, supported me. You must listen to him, Alice, not for his sake, but for your own, so you don't have to ask questions later. The meeting took place at the University Park Police Station in a small visiting room. When Trevor was brought in, I barely recognized him. He'd lost a lot of weight in the weeks since, gray in his hair. His eyes, once so bright and vibrant, now seemed faded. Mom, he said quietly, sitting down across from me at the small table. Trevor? I nodded, trying to stay calm. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure. Why did you want to see me? I interrupted him. He lowered his eyes, interlocking his fingers nervously. I wanted to explain. I wanted you to understand. What exactly am I supposed to understand, Trevor? How my son decided to put my sister in a mental institution and steal her house. It was all Lorraine, he said quickly. She manipulated me from the beginning. She found out about Aunt Beatrice's condition, about her house, and she came up with the whole plan. Introduced me to Crosby, said it was just business, that no one would get hurt. I chuckled bitterly. And you believed her? I loved her, Mom, he sounded desperate. I was afraid of losing her. She always said I wasn't ambitious enough, that we should strive for more. And for that, you betrayed your family? Trevor looked up at me, eyes full of tears. I didn't think it would go this far. At first, it was just a power of attorney to help Aunt Beatrice with her affairs. Then Lorraine said it would be wise to move her to a place where she could be taken care of and sell the house because it was too expensive to maintain. And every step of the way seemed logical, you know? No, I don't. I shook my head. How did drugging Beatrice make sense to you? How hiring an actress to defraud her relatives? How the plans to sell the house without the owner's knowledge? By the time I realized what was really going on, it was too late. He lowered his head. Crosby made it clear that if I stepped out of the game, I was in trouble. Serious trouble. So you decided to just go with the flow, let it happen? I was weak, he whispered. I was afraid. I I was confused, Mom. I didn't know how to get out of it. I looked at my son and saw in him the little boy who had once shattered his knee and came running to me for comfort. I saw a teenager who cried after his first heartbreak, saw a young man who supported me after Robert's death, and at the same time, I saw a grown man who made his choices and must be held accountable for them. I'll testify against Lorraine and Crosby, Trevor said. I'll tell you everything I know. My lawyer says it'll help mitigate the sentence. That's right, I nodded. but not for the sake of a reduced sentence, because it's the only way to make up for what you did. Can you ever forgive me? There was a plea in his voice. I stared at him for a long moment, feeling the motherly love and bitter disappointment struggling inside. I don't know, Trevor, I answered honestly. Not right now. Maybe someday, in time. But not now. His face contorted in pain, but he nodded. I understand, and I deserved it. When our time was up, I stood up, getting ready to leave. Mom, Trevor called out to me. I'm really sorry. About everything. I turned around, looking at him one last time. You know what the saddest part is, Trevor? I believe you're sorry, but it doesn't change what you did, and it doesn't change who you've become. With those words, I left the room, feeling a strange emptiness inside. It was as if a part of me had stayed there, with a son I might never see again. When I returned to Beatrice's house, I told her about the meeting. We sat on the veranda, wrapped in plaids despite the warm evening. Beatrice was still cold from her stay at the clinic. You did the right thing, Alice, she said, looking out at the sunset over the neat lawns of University Park. You gave him a chance to explain himself. That's more than he deserves. But is it enough? I sighed. He's still my son. He always will be. Beatrice covered my hand with hers. But right now, he needs to face the consequences of his actions, and you need time to heal. 2 weeks later, Beatrice and I and our lawyer, Simon Edwards, filed a formal lawsuit against Lorraine, Trevor, Dr. Crosby, and the Pine Barrens administration. There was a parallel criminal investigation going on, but the civil suit was our way of seeking justice and compensation for our injuries. The trial was scheduled for the fall, but in the meantime, Beatrice and I were slowly getting our lives back on track. I decided not to return to Middletown, at least not while the trial was pending. Beatrice offered to let me stay at her house, and I gratefully accepted. Honestly, she confided one evening as we were going through old photo albums, I'd feel better if you stayed for good. This house is too big for one old woman. You're not an old woman, I objected, smiling. You're just an experienced woman. 65 years of experience just for a minute. She laughed, and for the first time in a long time, I heard her real laugh. Slowly, I began to notice how our lives were changing. Beatrice and I, who had never been particularly close when we were young, now spent our days together, talking, reminiscing, sometimes crying, sometimes laughing. She told me about her life with Hudson, the trips they had taken, the dreams they had realized, and those that remained unrealized. I shared memories of Robert, of our humble but happy life, of the joys and difficulties of raising Trevor. You know, Beatrice said one of those evenings, I've always been a little jealous of you. Me? I raised my eyebrows in surprise. Of what? You had a child, a family. Hudson and I always wanted kids, but it didn't work out. I thought a successful career and money would make up for it, but now I realize it doesn't. And I've always envied your freedom, I admitted. To be able to travel, to not worry about money, to live in such a beautiful house. We looked at each other and laughed, realizing the irony of the situation. It's funny how life puts things in their proper place, Beatrice said thoughtfully. It took living through gray hair and a kidnapping for us to realize how important we were to each other. Summer gradually turned to fall. The leaves on the oaks in Beatrice's garden turned gold and red. We took many walks, enjoying the warm days of Indian summer, sometimes with Will Coventry, who became a good friend of ours. Will often stopped by, bringing us fresh baked goods from the bakery on the corner, telling us the city news. I noticed how Beatrice's eyes warmed when she saw him, and how he seemed to grow younger in her company. It was not a romantic attachment, rather a deep friendship between two people who had lived a long life and found in each other understanding and support. In October, the trial began. The process promised to be long and complicated, but the evidence against Crosby, Lorraine, and the others was irrefutable. Beatrice's notes, Trevor's testimony, documents from the Pine Barrens and Quiet Gardens, everything pointed to an elaborate criminal scheme. Trevor pleaded guilty to a lesser degree of accessory after the fact and received a suspended sentence plus community service, largely due to his cooperation with the investigation. Lorraine, despite plea bargaining with the prosecutor's office, was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Dr. Crosby received 12 years for multiple episodes of fraud, unlawful imprisonment, and practicing medicine in excess of authority. After the sentencing, I received a letter from Trevor. He wrote that he understood my choice to keep my distance from him, that he didn't expect forgiveness, but hoped that someday I would at least let him try to right the wrong he had done. I read the letter several times, but I didn't respond. The wound was too fresh, the pain of betrayal too sharp. In time, you will decide what to do with this relationship, Beatrice said when I showed her the letter. What was important now was that you heal yourself. By the end of the fall, life was slowly taking on a new direction. Beatrice and I decided that I would stay at her house permanently. I sold my house in Middletown and moved my personal belongings and books. Beatrice's neighbors, after hearing our story, began to treat us with special warmth. We were often invited to dinners and included in the social life of the neighborhood. You know what I've realized in these months? Beatrice told me in the evening as we sat by the fireplace, listening to the soft crackling of the logs. That real wealth isn't money or a house, but people who are willing to fight for you, like you fought for me. I smiled, feeling tears come to my eyes. We're sisters, aren't we? How could we not be? It could have been, she said seriously. A lot of people would have just believed Trevor and Lorraine, accepted what they said about my dementia. A lot of people wouldn't have looked, wouldn't have doubted. I just knew you too well, I shrugged. Knew you couldn't have forgotten how to swim or that you had a sister. Beatrice reached out and squeezed my palm. That's what I'm grateful to fate for having a sister who knows me so well. We sat in silence for a long time, staring at the fire. The November rain rustled outside the window, washing away the last leaves from the trees. Winter was ahead, then spring, and a new life we were starting together, supporting each other. I thought about Trevor, how easily he'd succumbed to Lorraine's influence, how quickly he'd forgotten everything I'd taught him. I wondered if I'd ever be able to trust him again, to let him into my life. Right now, I didn't have an answer to that question. Probably never would. But I knew one thing for sure. I didn't regret my choice. For coming to University Park, for not believing the dementia story, for fighting for the truth. I didn't regret cutting ties with a son who had betrayed not only me and Beatrice, but himself, his values, his conscience. What are you thinking about? Beatrice asked quietly, noticing my mood. About how strange life is, I answered. Sometimes the hardest trials lead to unexpected gifts. Like our friendship, she nodded. Better late than never. Like our friendship, I echoed, feeling the warmth in my chest. Outside the window, the wind blew the clouds away, revealing glimpses of starry sky. A new day, a new month, a new life was ahead of us. A life without Trevor, but with a newfound sister. A life of uncertainty, but also hope. And I was ready for that path, no matter what twists and turns it held.